Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of the Miss Texas Show with your co-host, Melissa Santana. Not only am I here to introduce you to the show, another great edition, but also to another wonderful guest. And today's guest is none other than Marcus Miller. Marcus Miller is not only an author, not only a survivor, not only an advocate, not only an instructor, but also a traveler, has done many, many things. And so Marcus is bringing us a wealth of knowledge, but also a wealth of experience. And so I am super excited to be able to get to know Marcus more. And I hope you are too. Tune in.
The Ms. Texas Show is a voice of hope for victims, survivors, advocates, and community leaders against gender-based violence to share their stories and resources. We began showcasing life in Texas. Today we are impacting lives not only in Texas, but also around the world. Under our segment Military Time, we run this segment in partnership with the National Veterans Chamber of Commerce. We invite military and veterans who have overcome traumatic events to share their experiences during and after their military service. Under our beauty segment, we invite fellow pageant winners and contestants, artists, musicians, actors, models, and dancers, and last but not least, our survivor leaders from family violence, sex trafficking, sexual assault, stalking, and other traumatic events, who are ambassadors for these causes to share their lives and the impact they have made. To become a guest on our show, email us at msusatexas@gmail.com. If you would like to support victims and survivors of gender-based violence, make a tax-deductible donation to Hope Picks Global at www.hopeyxglobal.org.
Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome once again to the Miss Texas Show with your co-host, Melissa Santana. As mentioned, not only am I always excited to bring you another edition of the show, but also another wonderful guest. And today's guest is certainly an honor and pleasure to have them on the show today, because that guest is Marcus Miller. And Marcus Miller is not only an author and adventurer, but a survivor of child abuse. Marcus Miller spent 22 years rescuing kidnapped victims from Colombia and the Caribbean basin. He is a firearms instructor, self-defense and edged weapons instructor, if you can say that 5 times fast, brings real-world skills to his writing. As a result, he's also currently the author of 10 novels and numerous short stories, is the young age of 66 years old, and spends his time traveling across the United States in an RV, which, by the way, need to share that is definitely life goals right there. I'm telling you, I either said RV or tiny house. That was actually my goal. I was like, maybe a tiny house, but then I would want the mobile tiny house. So at that point, I might as well get an RV. So it's like, this is where I keep going. I'm always like, which one do I do? But you're living out my life dream. So I just wanted you to know. But with that, it is a pleasure to have you, Marcus. Thank you so much for coming on the show today, taking time to be with us. And we definitely want viewers to get to know you better and who are you. So if you could let us know who you are, a little bit about your journey, what led you here today, all those wonderful things.
Sure, be happy to. And thank you so much for having me on.
Absolutely.
My story really starts as with my childhood. I was born into an abusive family. My father was a very violent person and beat me successively nearly every day, as often as he could get to, in a very special place in our home down in the root cellar that he called the Redemption Wall. It's actually the title of my very first novel, The Redemption Wall. It tells the story of living through his abuse until I could no longer stand it. I had really only one person in my family, my grandmother, his mother, who gave me some sort of protection. And when she passed away in 1966, I had no one left in the family that would protect me, not my mother or other grandparents or uncles. They were all too afraid of my father. Everybody in the community knew of his abuse of me. He was what I called a fire and brimstone preacher, and he used to bring me up in front of his congregation and strip me naked and beat me, trying to get the devil out of my soul. I don't think I had the devil in my soul, still don't, but he believed I did, and continued to beat me up until 1967. I finally found the opportunity to leave. My grandmother and her husband, my grandfather, had been secreting me money for years for that, what she called a rainy day. It was a getaway fund, something to get me away from my family. And so I had some money to get away with, and I took off. I actually rode out of the Willamette Valley in Oregon on a logging train. And once I got into Eugene, Oregon, I managed to find my way to the train yard where the freight trains were, and met a guy by the name of Ralph that was traveling with his young son down to California looking for work. And he was an experienced train rider, something I wasn't. And you really need to be if you're riding freight trains, or back in those days when you rode freight trains, probably still do if they let you. He helped me jump on a boxcar, and I rode that out of Oregon and into California. He, on the way, he attempted to school me in train travel, what we call rough travel. And basically that is learning about the difference between hobos, tramps, and bums, the three different types of riders that you would find on the trains. Hobos you can trust about as far as you can throw them. Tramps, not so much, and bums you want to leave in your wake as fast as you possibly can. There were two hobos on the freight train when we left Eugene, and when Ralph and his son left the train in Reading, I was left with those two hobos. Now, here I had left an abusive childhood behind. I thought from here on in it was going to be easy street. Just find a way to make some money, and I was really planning. My plans were to leave Oregon and go to Florida and get on a boat and sail into the Caribbean. I actually had a family that was waiting there for me if I could find a way to get away from my parents. Well, and after Ralph got off the train in Reading, I rode into Sacramento, into the huge train yard. It was a massive, massive train yard. Doesn't exist in its glory that it had back in the 60s, but rode into Sacramento with these two bums. One was named Top Hat and the other one was named Sam the Snake. And we got into Sacramento, and they took me under their wing. They insisted that they needed to help me along or else I would be in trouble. And in fact, at one point, they had actually saved me from being attacked by a bunch of bums that jumped on the train and tried to take my bags and their bags and valuables. Well, they beat them down. They had blackjacks, lead-filled leather blackjacks that they beat these guys down with, and saved me at that point. I thought I was in good care. Well, we got into the train yard. It was dark. It was late at night, and they bought a slab of bacon, and we found some shelter over near the river, and they served me up a little bit of food, and then managed to get drunk on booze that they had stolen from the tramps that they beat down. And a few hours later, in their drunken stupor, they showed their true colors, and they held me down and raped me, both of them. So here I was, what I call getting out of the frying pan into the fire, from one abuse to more abuse. And so my resolve really took hold. And while they were drunk, I beat them to the point where they couldn't come after me. And I took their blackjacks from them, and I headed off on foot, and managed to make it out of California eventually, and got into Nevada, and was hitchhiking and helped a woman and her 2 children that were traveling in an old Packard. And they went down, we got down the road just a little ways, and she blew a tire. She really didn't have any good tires on the vehicle. And so I helped her change her tire. When we got into Tonopah, Nevada, I was going to get on at that point, I wanted to get on a Greyhound bus and move east as fast as I possibly could. There wasn't a bus available that night that I got on. And so she asked to share a room with me and her kids, so that it didn't cost either one of us as much. I believe it cost about $8 for a room at that time. And so we split the room, her and her kids on one bed and me on another. They left early the next morning, and they were headed for Salt Lake City. As soon as they had left, I had some time because my bus didn't leave until 8 o'clock. So I decided I'd take a shower before I went and got my ticket and got on the bus. Well, while I was in the shower, she snuck back into the room and went through all my belongings and stole all my money. But I was left with a couple dollar bills and some change, and had no way to go. Couldn't afford to buy a ticket to anywhere at that point. So once again, I was learning some lessons on the road. I found a job on a ranch, and I'd grown up on a ranch. My father's big ranching family. And so I managed to work on this ranch for a few months and save up enough money to be able to finally buy a ticket and get out of there. And I headed east. I was hitchhiking, riding buses when I could, but here I and taken back to my father. I was able to, within a couple hours, get away from him again, and that was when I got on the logging train and split. So I was very worried about traveling on buses or any other transportation through large cities. I wanted to kind of skirt them and get around them and avoid police at all costs. I didn't know how hard he was looking for me, but my father was a very wealthy man and had a lot of power in the community that he was in. So I was concerned with that. I got as far as Kansas, and I was hitchhiking late one night in the rain down this highway in Kansas, and a family picked me up. I was wet and cold. I crawled in the car. I was thankful for the ride, honestly. And they had the heater turned on, and I was wet and chilled and promptly fell asleep. The next thing I knew, when I woke up, I was being sold to a farmer outside of Waukene, Kansas, into servitude. I was put into a dormitory building, and in that building there was 15 other children. My age at this point, I was 11 years old now. 11 years old, big for my age, but I was only 11 years old. Some of the kids were younger than me, the same age, and a few that were older. They had all been there, slaves on this work farm for weeks and months. They had no way to get away. In the morning, they fed us some gruel, nasty food, and put us out on the fields to work all day long. and we weren't allowed to eat a midday meal or anything. Well, when we got brought back into to the farmhouse, at that point I had had enough. Here I'd been abused by my father. I'd been raped and abused by a couple of hobos. I'd had all my money stolen from me. I was fed up with taking abuse. I managed to get in a situation where I was able to beat my captors unconscious, and I got away, and I took the other 15 kids with me. We stole the farm pickup. It was a big flatbed. I got all the kids on the back, and we drove into Waukena, Kansas, and I put them on buses. One bus going east and the other bus going west. I paid for their tickets with the money that I had worked for in Nevada and saved for my trip. Now, after it had been stolen, I'd worked and saved a little money. I was able to buy them all tickets. I gave them enough money to buy some food along the way. And with about $7 in my pocket, I walked out of Kansas, headed for Florida. I had learned a lot along the way. A lot more than an 11-year-old. By the time I got into Florida, I was 12. It took me 162 days to cross the country. It was a growing experience for me the whole way. When I finally got into Florida and found the family that I was hoping to sail away with, I caught them just before they left. They didn't really know that I had left. They had hoped I did, but they hadn't heard from me. There was no way. This was obviously before cell phones, and I didn't have a payphone number to call them because I didn't know where they were. But I managed to track them down and find them. And when they saw me, they thought I looked like someone who had come back from the war. I felt, well, I was 12 years old going on 30, truthfully. I had quite an experience, but we ended up sailing into the Caribbean, and sometime later I was able to help a lady move her boat from the southern Bahamas and sail it down to Puerto Rico. Her husband had been hurt on board the boat, and they had brought him, managed to put him ashore and put him on a plane that flew him down to San Juan, Puerto Rico. There wasn't a hospital that could do anything for him in Nassau in the Bahamas. So in Puerto Rico, it was actually closer. So they flew him down there, and then I helped this lady sail her boat. Got down to the Dominican Republic, and she was very worried about her husband. We got a phone call from the telecommunications service out of the Dominican Republic, and her husband was in real bad shape. So she ended up getting on a plane and flying down. Well, I ran into a group of slavers. When we first entered, back up just a little bit, when we first entered the Bahamas, we met, one of the first individuals we met was a native islander by the name of Albert Saunders. And he was sailing his boat all through the islands in search of his daughters. They had been taken from him by human traffickers, slavers, they call them, in the middle of the night out of his small settlement on Crooked Island, which is very far south in the Bahamas. And so he had been searching for months trying to find his daughters, didn't know where they were. I don't know that he ever did find them. I ran into Albert over the years, and the last time I saw him, he'd never found them. Anyways, this late one night, I saw this boat going ashore in this little village. I was anchored in a poor harbor on Ackland's Island, getting ready to make the big crossing down towards Dominican Republic and Haiti. And this boat went in ashore late at night with no lights on. So I got in the dinghy and I followed it in. I didn't really have any weapons other than a large skinning knife that I carried with me, and my blackjacks, and a spear that I used to spearfish with. There was 5 men that went ashore, and when I got there, they were already hauling girls out of the village, and they were tying them up and putting them in their boat. They were going to get as many as they could, I guess. I managed to ambush all 5 men and rescue the girls that they were trying to steal away. I got away from there and sailed down to Dominican, left the woman on a plane, and was going to make the rough passage from Hispaniola across to San Juan, Puerto Rico. It's called the Morro Passage. Very rough. It's about 70, 80 miles wide. And the timing of it was I ended up crossing it in the middle of the night. I'd been warned not to do it, but timing, it was inevitable. I did it. About halfway across, it was pretty rough waters. Some Cuban pirates in fast boats tried to board the sailing vessel. I had been able to get some real weapons, firepower, off of the slavers when I took them down on Ackland's Island. So I had a good shotgun, and I fought these guys off and got away from them. When I got into San Juan, Puerto Rico the next morning, the Coast Guard told me that I was very lucky to have made it across the Morro Passage, because that week alone, 7 yachts had disappeared with all their crews on board, and they were still searching for them. But they knew that these Cuban pirates were running rampant in the passage, and they were very surprised that I'd managed to cross it without getting caught. Well, all of these experiences came to the attention of a private military group that was based out of Panama. They tracked me down and interviewed me and invited me to join their work. Their work was being sanctioned by the U.S. State Department. What the State Department wanted them to do was to stop the human trafficking and the modern day pirates that were running rampant in the Caribbean basin, because it was hurting tourists, hurting the tourism of the islands. And these islands down there in the Caribbean, they existed only, they really had no exports. Their tourism dollars was what kept them alive. And if they didn't get the tourists to come visit them, and what the State Department told this group was, if the tourists, American and European tourists, find out that there's a chance that their daughters and sons will be abducted off of the islands when they go on vacation, they're not going to go there for a vacation. So the tourist dollars would go away. So this private military group, it was called the Organization, and they were sanctioned with stopping that. As in addition, there was a huge problem with kidnapping of Europeans in Colombia at the time. Colombia was in a war with a group of rebels called FARC, F-A-R-C. It was a 40-year war that they fought there, but the members of FARC were actually drug dealers and drug smugglers, and they used those drug proceeds to buy weapons from Cuba to arm themselves. They found another source of income by kidnapping Europeans and holding them for ransom. Unfortunately, even after ransoms were paid, and in the beginning, the ransoms demands were really chump change, a few $1,000s, but the families of the kidnapped victims and the governments and the businesses that some of these people work for went ahead and started paying those ransoms. And as they paid them, the ransoms got higher. When I first began doing the work, the ransoms were starting to get up towards the hundreds of thousands of dollars and millions in some cases with families. So the State Department wanted that kidnapping put to a halt, but they needed to get the victims out, and they needed to get them out alive, hopefully. So this group offered me a position with them, but I wasn't ready at the time. I was very young. I was 12, 13 years old. I wasn't looking to get into anything like that until a few years later. The family that I had sailed into the islands with was caught by pirates down off the coast of Colombia, and they were brutally murdered. And at that point, I was 15 years old. I felt like this was my calling. I needed to do this. And so I accepted the offer with this private military group, the organization, and they flew me into Panama, into the jungles of Panama, deep into the jungles of Panama. And I spent 6 months there in 1970 and 71, and they trained me. The instructors were all military members from the elite militaries of around the world, retired military members, as well as 4 of the instructors that became very close friends of mine for the rest of their lives, that were members of Mossad, the Israelis. And they trained me to operate solo in rescuing kidnapped victims. And the reason it had to be done solo was because in a Colombian village, if a team of men walk into a village, the whole village knows it immediately, and so do the kidnappers. And so they can either execute their hostages, or they can move them deeper into the mountains and into the jungles, and to escape that group. Whereas if one person dressed like a local comes into that village, nobody's going to suspect him. So for 22 years, I operated solo and was fortunately able to rescue hundreds of kidnapped victims. One night in Cartagena, Colombia, I took 160 women off of a ship just before it sailed. That ship was going to the Gulf states, Bahrain and Saudi Arabia. They already had buyers for these women and children. I was able to stop the ship before it sailed and rescue the women. But generally, most of the kidnap recoveries were done either individuals or families. And so I operated in Colombia and some in Central America, some in the Caribbean. I did a certain amount of work in Haiti, and I was sent on 11 missions into communist Cuba between 70 and 84. Most times when I went in legally, I used a Canadian passport because Americans were not welcome there at that time. But on a number of occasions, I went in dark. I went in secretly, and some of the work I did there was for the CIA, hauling weapons and people in, and then I was sent in to bring people out that were very close to Castro. So it was a pretty exciting time in the Caribbean and in South America at that time, and I was very fortunate to be a part of it. I will say that of the hundreds of kidnapped victims that I was sent after, I brought them all out alive. I was very, very fortunate. And not everybody that was in the business was able to do that. Now, that's not to say that they were whole, because many of them weren't. Some people would have hands and fingers amputated. Women would have their breasts removed. And and not surgically, I mean, hacked away. And the children, probably worst of all, because they were not only tortured, but physically abused as well. Mentally and physically, they were ruined. Some of the children I brought out couldn't speak anymore. They mumbled. They had lost their voices. They'd lost their minds. I heard over the years of some of the victims that I was able to rescue that that after a period of time ended up taking their own lives. It was just too much to live with. And so while I'm a little old to be actually doing recoveries anymore, the books that I write are informative about the human trafficking problem that is going on throughout the world. And there's no country in the world that's immune to it. Every single country in the world has human traffickers working in it. And it probably is not something that's ever going to be stopped, but the more aware we can make the public about it, the better chance we have of protecting those young ones and making them informative so that they don't get into a situation where they can be trafficked. I just recently published my 10th book, which is titled Predator's Highway. And it talks about trafficking that's going on down in Mexico and along the border. I'm working now on my 11th book, and it is basically a how to not become a victim book. In fact, it's tentatively titled Not a Victim, Lessons in Survival. And I hope that this book, as well as my others, will help to to train the readers on how not to put themselves into a position where they can be trafficked, how to get away from abuse, and not become victims. So I'm thrilled to be able to be a part of your group and helping you all out, and maybe together we can all make an impact on this horrible problem we have in the world. That's just getting worse. When I first got into it, there weren't computers or cell phones or any type of communication devices, and so with technology moving rapidly forward, it gives these predators and criminals much easier routes to attract victims and to secretly get away and out from under the eyes of law enforcement. So it's a tough battle, and it'll be one that will take us all to our graves, I'm sure. But we do what we can.
Always. And I not only do I appreciate so much that you actually shared that incredible journey. So like you've definitely a life well lived for sure. Like you've had a lot of, incredible experiences. Of course, not all of them being positive, but I just, it's just incredible to hear, and definitely so humbling to know that, you went having faced abuse, and unfortunately on more than one occasion. So like as you were literally in the middle of your escape, you're finding yourself in other abusive situations. And so naturally I definitely can definitely see why you would have a wealth of knowledge around survival skills, because I mean I'm sure you've developed them, and not necessarily always by choice, but unfortunately just given like life's conditions. But at the same time you definitely did turn those into like a wealth of experiences that you're now able to share with others. And I agree, I think it's wonderful that you're now able to do that, and that there were so many lives that you literally saved. I know there were some that also, like you mentioned, unfortunately are no longer with us, but there were just so many lives impacted by what you did, the sacrifices that you made, and you having been someone yourself that had to escape, that had to run away. And so like you having known that, you dedicating your life to being able to help other people escape that is just definitely something definitely wonderful, incredible, but also like not something that everybody can say, that they've done. But I think too, what I wanted to at least highlight too, I mean, there were so many great things that you shared there. Naturally, because of that, I want as many people as they can to read the books, because clearly there's a lot of stories here that, there's so much more that we can obviously always discuss. But I do appreciate so much that you are bringing awareness specifically to human trafficking, because as you mentioned, there are so many creative ways that, traffickers that they use to be able to get people into that life. And we know that we especially take a stand here on the Miss Texas Show against human trafficking, being that, our main host, Eileen Dong, is a survivor of human trafficking herself. So, I mean, definitely, we wholeheartedly support any stand against that. And I appreciate too that you have survival skills, but I actually wanted to also highlight too that we know too, when it comes to human trafficking, sometimes you can't always avoid. I mean, some people are very crafty with how they recruit people into the life. So I mean, I also don't want people to think too. I mean, I think, you're sharing, especially from that survival perspective, having been a survivor yourself, having, gone through all these different experiences yourself. But I don't want viewers to think like that. We also don't want to acknowledge that, for some, it wasn't anything they could have done to prevent it. It's just that unfortunately they, played into exactly what the trafficker wanted, which is that charm, which is that intrigue. They took advantage of whatever vulnerability. So yeah, I was hoping that maybe you could like speak on that also, and what you know about it and how, that plays out.
Well, despite a lot of people think criminals are dumb. Now, criminals sometimes do dumb things, but human predators learn from their mistakes. So just like a predator in the wild will learn from their missteps and mistakes, human predators also. So they're very, very crafty. They know how to work around law enforcement, and law enforcement in a lot of cases is hamstrung in their ability to operate. There's a lot of people that are arrested and then allowed back on the street to continue what they do while they wait to go to court. I'm a firm believer that human traffickers and child molesters and rapists are recidivists. I do not believe that it is possible to rehabilitate them. I don't believe that any amount of incarceration will ever make them a better person, because it's ingrained within their soul. They're going to do it again. And yet law enforcement, even if the police department wants to keep them in prison, the current laws sometimes works against them. And these people get released back on the street, smarter and better at doing their deadly deeds than they ever were before. And this is what we're up against. And as young children or women that are vulnerable to this, oftentimes they're coming out of situations or in some cases foreign countries where their lives are a shambles. Some are running from abusive families or abusive situations, abusive husbands or boyfriends, and just looking for some kind of an out. And these predators know how to attract that type of individual. It's like those children that were kidnapped in Kansas. Most of them were lured into slavery with the hopes of a hot meal. And taking these people up on their offer of a hot meal was what put them into servitude. So they didn't know any better. They were obviously hungry, and so a lot of the women and children today that end up in the hands of human traffickers get there through devious methods. And it's hard to educate everyone about this. And hopefully some of them, even after they're taken by the traffickers, can be recovered at some point. But the problem is they move them so fast and so swiftly someone can be taken by a human trafficker in Houston, Texas today, and tomorrow morning that child or woman is across the border in Mexico, and that the next day on a ship sailing out of Veracruz headed to ports unknown. They move these bodies so quickly that it's very, very hard to track them. And so it's a tough road to hoe. Education is the first thing. Educate as many people as we can. I will say that over the last few years, there's been more awareness.
Absolutely.
There are certain places I've seen, hospitals and airports that now have posters and banners up. Some of the national parks and state parks put posters in the bathrooms with phone numbers for children or women to call if they're in a situation where they can get to a phone and call for help. Those tools were not available years ago. Right. So there's definitely much more awareness about it now. It needs to be more so. We need commercials on TV. We need commercials on the radio. We need awareness to every aspect of the public.
Absolutely. Oh, I can agree more. And that's why I'm just so glad too that, as you mentioned, you are also part of the awareness too. I mean, 10 books is no small feat. And the fact that you're working on your 11th. And so I'm also curious about that. Like, were you just making those in the midst of your experiences? And did you like self-publish? Like, how did you get to, have cultivated all that?
No, I didn't start writing until 2016.
Wow.
I had dabbled in writing, but not to the extent. In fact, I'd actually for 30 years I'd tried to write the story of my life. A very few people who knew it, and I want to clarify, I was married twice and raised 3 children, and none of my wives or children ever knew what I did. Wow. It was something that I couldn't reveal to them, and so finally, I've been divorced from my second wife for about 3 years, and in 2016 I injured my knee to the point where I couldn't move around. And one day I sat down in front of a computer and started writing the first book, The Redemption Wall, the story of my life. And a month and a half later, I had written 160,000 words.
Wow.
A very large novel.
Absolutely.
It became a trilogy. It became there's 3 books in that series, the Redemption Wall series, and it tells the story of my life, my escape from my family, moving across the country, going into the Caribbean, the situations that I was involved with in the recruitment by the private military force, and the work I did for them is detailed very, very specifically detailed in the final 2 books, which is the second book is called Slave Tracks, and the third is The Redeemer's Vow. Then while I was writing those, I started writing another series called the Forgotten Man series, and deals with a person who does in modern times what I did back then, and what they have to deal with in taking down human traffickers in the modern world. Then I've penned a couple other books. One called Crossroads, Texas. It's about a town in Texas that traffics children from all over the United States and sends them into Mexico.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, I've done a lot of writing. I am able to, fortunately, we move around the country in the RV. It's a good way to move. If you don't like your neighbors, you can move someplace else and find new neighbors.
Right.
So
well, yeah, absolutely. Well, and
So
then and I just love too to know that, like you said, clearly at the right time. So that story definitely needed to be written. I mean, the fact that you were able to come out with 160,000 words, I mean, that is not, that is clearly there's intention behind that. But like you mentioned, there were times where you tried and then it wasn't necessarily the right time for it to come out. And then when it did incredibly. So like I just think it's encouraging to know that for others who maybe think, know that they have a story that they might want to tell and all that, if it's not coming out right now, maybe it's just not the right time. You don't need to force it, but at the same time, I mean, you have a story to write for a reason. But I just think it's incredible that, with that being said, I mean, definitely, I think we should feel encouraged. I mean, you as a person who has written 10 books, I would have definitely thought that you had been doing that your whole life. So it's just amazing to know that actually no, like it was actually a most recent thing that you've done, but already your contribution is just that great though. So I just feel like, I mean, clearly that's definitely part of your legacy, but it didn't necessarily have to be from the very beginning. And so it's
right.
just, yeah, like I said, astounding. But with that, I think you mentioned that you were in the midst of writing some others, and I mean, you also mentioned your RV travels. I'm curious, like what other future plans you have, like what else is life looking like now that you're thankfully on the other side of all of this work you've done, and all those great things.
But for the time being, I'm going to stay with what I'm doing. I'm going to continue to put books out there as fast as I can write them. Fortunately, my lifestyle, I have the ability to spend a lot of time writing. I try to find my way into campgrounds and RV resorts across the country where I can stay months at a time and not have to pick up and move all the time. And so that gives me a lot of time to write. We've seen a lot of the country. We've been from Montana to Maine, in and out of Florida, maybe six times or so. Been all over California, Illinois, Indiana. We just been all over. It's a nice way to travel. It's a nice way to see the country. But it also gives me a chance to work on my books. Research. My sixth book was titled "The Caldera Abduction," and I actually started writing it in Yellowstone National Park. And the storyline behind it was I found out while I was in Yellowstone. I was there for 6 months, and I found out how many people, and I'm talking in the mega thousands, have over the years gone into national parks and disappeared.
Oh no.
Never been found. So when I got this information, and I actually learned it from the Park Service while I was there, I began to research it and found that people were being, and children and women especially, were being abducted in the national parks and secreted out of there and taken out of the country. And so the book, The Caldera Abduction, talks about that. So that helped to fuel the information in my books, my travel around the country. And I hope it will continue to do that.
Oh, absolutely. And when you say we, as far as the traveling is concerned, is that the kids or like who is it that travels with you?
No. I have a partner. She and I met each other 3 years after we'd been divorced from our husbands and wives, and she enjoys camping. So we travel together.
Wow, how cool is that? And see, that's another part of the life dream. So being able to not only travel and go wherever you want, whenever you want, but also with someone who also shares that interest. So I love that. I just love to hear it. So I know I heard we, so I was like, I have to ask, like, who is the person? But in the midst of that, it's giving you time to still dedicate to your writings, to still increase that awareness. And like you mentioned, I definitely want to take away from what you also talked about is that incredible, but also horrific at the same time, that you've been able to see all these great wonders of the world, including national parks, but then unfortunately know that, that stark reality that a lot of abductions take place there as well. But, in the midst of it, still bringing that awareness, still trying to help others to realize that, and still being able to help, individuals learn more about it. So I just think all of that, of course, has been nothing but incredible to hear on my end, but it's just wonderful that you're also putting that effort into the writings and being able to help others learn more about that also. So definitely. And so with that, I know that we had a couple little connection issues here towards the end, but if you are still with us, Marcus, I don't know if you had anything else you wanted to share with viewers.
I'm having a little difficulty with internet signal down here. We've got a lot of thunderstorms around us, and it's messing with my signal.
Oh yeah, but see what? Oh well, the good thing is I hear you now, and I want to take advantage and say if you had anything else you want to share, or also how can individuals find you, find your books, any of those wonderful things.
Well, all my books are available on Amazon and Goodreads. I publish through Amazon, so they're all there. The two series to look for would be the Redemption Wall series and the Forgotten Man series. But all the books are there. I publish in all formats. I publish in Kindle for those who like electronic format, and as well as hardcover and paperback. My website is marcusmillerauthor.com. marcusmillerauthor.com. And on that website, there's a lot of information on me, on current activities, future projects, the books that I've written, and plus I've got a lot of short stories that I write in between my books when I'm trying to do something a little bit different. And some of them are quite enjoyable. I've actually won some awards, some of my short stories as well.
Right. No big deal. Just, award-winning author here that we are speaking with. But no, that is tremendous, awesome. It keeps them busy. But also like it's definitely something worth, being able to check out. So y'all heard it here. I just want to reiterate, we got Amazon, we got Goodreads, and we got the website. So marcusmillerauthor.com. So obviously there's a way to be able to find Marcus. So you definitely should be able to connect. Definitely should be able to learn more, but also get those books because clearly they're good reads. But even if you want some, fun, easy reads, you got the short stories as well. So was there anything else you wanted to be able to share with us, Marcus, today?
I tell you, I think I've run out of stuff to talk about probably.
Got it. No, but I just wanted to give you that last floor. So with that, it has been a pleasure. And definitely we learned so very much from you. So viewers, again, I encourage you to reach out. And Marcus, I thank you so much for being on the show today.
And
Thank you.